Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about some changing internal audit priorities in challenging economic times. Now, just recently, a lot of organizations have actually stopped giving income and earnings projections due to some of the challenging economic times that we're in. Now, this is not necessarily new, but I want to talk today about some of the things that internal audit should consider as we are in these times. So as risks are changing, as things are happening in the world, what should we be doing as internal audit? Should we be changing our priorities? If we started off a few months ago with an audit plan for the year, should we stick to that, or should we actually maybe change some of the priorities, swap out certain projects for other things? Based on what's going on. Now, the short answer is you probably should consider and may need to change your priorities based on some of the things that have been going on. Maybe not, right? Maybe you already had anticipated a lot of these things at the beginning of the year, and so you still may be doing okay, right? But as things are changing quickly, this is a point in time when risk-based internal auditing is even more important because as the risks are changing, we need to be flexible and ready to make the changes as well. So let's go through now and talk about some of the different things that you may want to consider. And some of these are similar things that we would be considering during any challenging economic times. Because as we go through these cycles, we find that there are some similar things that tend to happen whenever the economy gets weak, if we go into recession, if companies are struggling, there are some general things that we're going to talk about that you may want to consider. And you may have already considered it, you may not have, but I'm just providing you some information so you can decide what is best for you. Now, the big elephant in the room is the trade war and tariffs that are going on in the world, along with the underlying geopolitical issues that go along with that. Okay. Now, first we need to stop and just think, briefly about tariffs and about risk-based audit. So, most of the time when events come up, we tend to just automatically assume that the event is the risk, but the event is not the risk. Okay, the risk or reward, because some organizations are going to find opportunities in this arena, are the impacts to your organization. And so, let's just walk through that briefly, because I'm sure that again, if you're not directly impacted by tariffs, your organization probably is indirectly affected by the tariffs because of the products and services that you get for your organization are probably coming through some foreign supply chain. So tariffs are an event, right? There's forces that have gone on in the world that have caused the U.S. government to specifically go after and change their policy around tariffs. So tariffs are an event, right? It's not a risk of tariffs. Tariffs are not a risk. Tariffs are an event. So let's think about what are some of the impacts that tariffs can have. Because again, if I say tariffs are not the risk, right? They're just an event. Well, how do tariffs impact organizations? So, some of the obvious ones, tariffs usually cause prices to go up, right? So, if I'm importing things from China or Vietnam or Europe into the United States, now those products are going to cost me more because I have to pay for the material, but I also have to pay a tax or tariff on that. Okay. And for some of the tariffs, I think I've seen as high as 125% for some things coming from some countries. So, what that means is if I'm an organization And let's say I used to pay $100 for every one of the things that I need to bring into this country to be able to sell the products and services that I do. Well, now instead of it costing $100, it's probably costing me $200 with the tariffs, which means, right, my costs of goods have gone up, which means either if I cannot pass all of those costs on to my uh, customers, then my margins will decrease, right? My costs go up, meaning my margins go down. So I'm earning less on every item that I spend. Now, for each organization, it's going to be different, right? If you can pass on these costs to your customers, if they will continue to pay double what they've been paying right now, then the impact to your organization is not as great as it would be to an organization who cannot pass on those costs, right? Maybe their customers will only take a 25% increase. So the impact to those customer companies is that their income is going to go down because their margin is going down, right? Now, how does that impact the organization? Well, obviously, right, in the income that you're able to make, but also from a liquidity standpoint. And so there are impacts related to liquidity around tariffs. So, if, again, for example, maybe you don't have enough liquidity to pay $200 to have your cost of goods sold go up by double, maybe you don't have the cash flow to actually do that. Well, that's an impact of the tariffs. That's a liquidity risk. Okay. And so, again, you have to go through and kind of think about the process all the way through on how your organization is actually impacted by the event, which are tariffs. Okay. Now, again, I know a lot of organizations have already started doing this. They've been doing it now for a few months. Internal audit may not have been doing it, but your organizations, I'm sure, have a plan and are understanding what the impact some of these tariffs may have. So, from an internal audit perspective, we should be understanding what is the organization doing? Do they need help? Is there assurance that we should be providing, right, to make sure that the plan that the organization has in place is actually working and is operating the way that it needs to, right? So, liquidity ends up becoming a big risk for organizations when it comes to tariffs. Now, liquidity is a risk that shows up often during economic challenging times, regardless of whether there's tariffs or not, right? Because as sales go down or as costs go up, a lot of organizations that are running on kind of razor thin margins, right? They're not making very much money on every product or service that they're selling. They tend to get squeezed during this time, and their liquidity ends up being a problem. They don't have enough cash to actually pay for everything that they need to do. And so at that time, organizations will often make kind of short term decisions around liquidity. They may lay off people, they may reduce budgets, they may cut people's salaries, they may hold off on purchasing. They may do some sales in the short term to try to drum up liquidity, right? And so liquidity risk is one of the things that we see all of the time whenever there are challenging economic times. So whether it's caused by tariffs or caused by something else, liquidity risk for your organization has probably gone up significantly. So if liquidity risk has gone up, what should internal audit be doing? I don't know. I can't tell you exactly for your organization, but that's one of those risks that you should be looking into. What's the organization doing? What are things that maybe we should be doing, right, as well? So again, I'm not going to make this a huge, long video all about tariffs, but I want to talk about some of the other things that we typically see during these times. Now, on our Audit Leader Forum call this last week, this topic came up. And so we went through and discussed some of the things that these chief audit executives are looking at. And sure enough, most of them are very similar to things that we would experience in any economic challenge. So, one thing that we see often is a concern around revenue recognition. So, whenever times are challenging, some people in the organization, in order to meet expectations, and those expectations could be of the market, right? Like I have to release a certain earnings per share, or else my stock price is going to get hammered, right? Causes sometimes people to commit financial reporting fraud or to manipulate revenue recognition, meaning that during the current year, maybe they pull in revenue that they really don't deserve or haven't earned until the next year, or maybe they hold off and wait and report revenues in the following period because they've already met expectations, right? And so, a lot of times, again, at this point, looking back at your revenue recognition policies, what's actually going on, finding areas where there can be some weaknesses in that, and just making sure that revenue is recorded properly. Because again, regulators and others realize that these are things that go on during these times. So they're going to be checking for more of that as well going forward. Now, the revenue recognition, again, it could be done for many different reasons, right? Sometimes it's to meet expectations externally, but sometimes these manipulations happen and people do them because they're rationalizing that it's the right thing to do. Okay, I may be a manager in a certain part of a business and I don't want to have to lay my people off. And so I'm going to choose instead to report things maybe better than they actually are, in the hopes that my budget doesn't get cut and my people don't get cut. And so, from a fraud triangle perspective, right, in challenging economic times, rationalization is much easier to do than it is in regular times. When people are desperate, they're willing to rationalize lots of things that they normally would not rationalize. Okay. So, revenue recognition is another area that you may want to consider taking a look at. And again, this goes back into executive compensation, can sometimes be one of the triggers or forces on that as well. Because if your executives are compensated, let's say on stock options, they're going to want to make sure that the stock price is as good as it can be. And so, because of that, sometimes those things happen. Now, also in challenging economic times, in general, the risk of fraud goes up. So I already mentioned a little bit about financial reporting fraud, but all kinds of fraud end up going up during challenging economic times. And so again, maybe if you don't normally look at fraud, which normally fraud is not material for most organizations, but now if we realize that the likelihood of fraud has gone up significantly, maybe it's time that we take a look at it again. And the fraud can show up in lots of different areas. You know, one of the chief audit executives said they're increasing their executive expense reporting uh, audits that they're doing. Right. Normally, they don't spend that much time on it, but because of what's going on, they just want to make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. Right. So fraud can show up that way. Fraud can show up in lots of different ways as well. You know, is as you let's say if salaries are going down or budgets are being cut, a lot of times employees will again rationalize and feel like, well, they're owed something. And so they will find a way to maybe have the company pay for more of their personal expenses. They'll commit things like expense report fraud, other things like that. So, in general, as I said, fraud risk tends to go up during these times. Now, some of the other things to consider, especially in what's going on currently, is from a regulatory standpoint, a lot of organizations are cutting back some of the compliance work and some of the regulatory things that they have been doing. And so, again, you need to understand, what is your organization doing about this, and what are the things that end up impacting you. But I will tell you as an example, if you're in a highly regulated industry like banking, what I've been hearing from a lot of audit leaders is the organization is consciously chosen to dial back, to not do as much information or not do as much work around regulatory compliance, with the understanding that some of these regulations have already gone away, will go away, will probably not be enforced. And so some organizations are choosing to say, look, that's one area where we're going to cut back. We're not going to do work in that area. Now, from an internal audit perspective, what does that mean? Well, I know there's some internal auditors that would say, well, now hold it. That's the wrong thing to do, right? We're supposed to be auditing these things, and whether or not they're going to enforce those regulations or not, we still need to do it. But it's not your decision. It's the decision of the organization, right? We serve at the pleasure of the organization. And so if your board and if your management is asking you to maybe reprioritize and do less work around regulatory compliance, that's their choice, right? And again, there are discussions that the chief audit executive can have with the other executives in the board. But if the board and the executives decide that's the priority, then internal audit's priority should change as well. Now, other companies are choosing to continue to do things as they were, even though regulations are changing and they realize there probably won't be any enforcement. So again, one of the chief audit executives who was on the call, there's a lot of talk around the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act here in America, and that the U.S. government is no longer going to prosecute or hold companies to the FCPA regulation and law. So some organizations have said, hallelujah, we're not going to do FCPA anymore. And some have cut back efforts there. Other companies have said, well, we don't really care. We believe that FCPA is the right thing to do. And so we're going to continue to do things that way, right? Even though we don't have to. And so again, from an internal audit perspective, this is where, it's time to have discussions with the executives and with the board on how are the priorities changing in the organization, and how should internal audit priorities change to reflect those as well. Now, what I will tell you is this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to change your priorities when the priorities of your organization change. You don't have to agree with those changes, but we should be aligned with the organization's decisions. Okay. Those of you that choose not to, right, that choose to pound on the table and say, no, we're going to do it in any way. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think you're wrong, board and senior management. Well, during every economic downturn, we see this happen. We see some audit leaders who, for whatever reason, believe that they know better than the organization. They get kind of self-righteous and, no, I know better. I know what we're supposed to do, and I'm independent, and you can't tell me what to do. And when that happens, those people lose their jobs. So one other thing that we're going to find, or we will see, as we always see during these times, right, those internal audit groups that are not willing to adapt, are not willing to be flexible, are not willing to listen to the board and to the senior executives, those internal audit groups who are not willing to take a risk-based approach and actually change what they're doing based on the changing risks, you will find that those groups, the leaders will probably get fired, the resources will get cut back, because they're no longer being a team player. Because ultimately, for you to provide value to your organization, the organization needs to see the value that you're creating. And if you're fighting against everybody, if you're not being a team player, if you're not, going the way that the organization has chosen to go, then you're not adding value in their mind. And because of that, Things will happen. There will be consequences to every choice. So I'm going to wrap up, for today. But again, these are just a few things, right? And I've got a whole list of things that we kind of talked about. Um, but again, revenue recognition, some of the things around tariffs, liquidity, changing regulation as well, are some things for you to consider. So, don't make the mistake that a lot of people do and say, well, I created my audit plan back in January or December, and I've told the audit committee that's what I'm going to do. And so I'm going to stick to it. That's the audit plan I'm going to do. No, right? If you're truly being a risk-based internal audit group, your audit priorities, your audit plan will change and should change as the risks to your organization change, as strategies and decisions that your organization make change, so that we can actually be aligned to our organization. Now, these are exciting times. I use the word challenging, but they're also exciting times for internal audit. And let me tell you why. The reason is, your organization right now is going through a lot of change, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate these challenging economic times. And some companies are going to do it well. Other companies are going to go out of business. Again, that's what we see every time, economics get challenging. Certain companies don't make it. Others do. And it's a great opportunity for internal audit to show our flexibility, to show that we're team players, to show that we're here and willing to do what it takes to help our organizations make it through. And so that's why I say they're also exciting times, right? Because internal audit groups that are poised to do this, who are flexible, who think strategically, that have good audit leadership, right? These are the internal audit groups that during these times, when times are tough and you show that you're a team player, it makes a huge impact on your long-term relationships with the board and with senior management as well. It also, as from an audit leader perspective, can make, huge relationships on your team as well, as you take care of them, as you stand up as a strategic leader and do what you need to do, right, to help your organization and help your team. So more on this to come, because there's a lot more to talk about. But for today, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this video, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks.